Hi everyone, welcome to today's video. My name's Stephanie and today I'm going to be showing you Holo Taco's new Underglow collection. This is a 6-piece lineup of shimmer polishes inspired by the graceful glow echoing off of misty mountains and glistening glaciers in a cold winter landscape. These polishes are permanent, but the box is limited edition, as are a lot of Holo Taco collections, and as you can see, this box is beautiful with its cellophane iridescent kind of wrapping. As I'm sure you can tell, this video is pretty long because I have a ton of comparisons for you guys, as well as full hand swatches for these and showing them in different lighting. So as always, timestamps for everything will be in the description box down below. But for now, let's just get into the swatches. Just kidding. Of course, we have to look at the collection box. It looks so glorious, especially in the sun. It's actually so shiny that I kind of blinded myself for a bit, but I would say it's worth it, maybe. So yeah, it's pretty standard with the names on the back. I did also want to show this in indirect light so you can get a better look at the design and see how shifty those colors are, as well as how reflective this box is. It really has this like mirror-like shine. And the inside says glow with the flow. So getting into the collection, the first polish we have is Moon Lagoon, and this one is described as a light aqua green jelly base with pink micro shimmer. To be nitpicky, I personally would not call this a jelly base, but rather a crelly, because it is really buildable. You can see just how much coverage I have here on the first coat, where it's not fully opaque, but it does obscure the nail line a decent amount. For my live swatch here, I ended up just doing 2 coats because I thought that it gave me really great coverage. Even though there is like a little hint of nail line, I personally find that it's not as noticeable. It's very passable in my opinion, or at least for my taste. The formula, as you saw, was really smooth. Again, very even coverage. It self-leveled really nicely. I will say I think this does lean a little bit pearly, but not too bad. And I didn't see it mentioned in the description, but it does have a beautiful shift to orange in indirect light. And yeah, no surprise, I just really loved how this one looked on me. It's such a soothing kind of color with this really pretty shimmer that stands out really nicely in my opinion. The only place it doesn't really shine is in lower light. It just has that really subtle kind of look to it, but definitely fits the underglow theme. The next shade is Shadow Lake, and this one is described as a deep gray jelly base with a blue micro shimmer. I personally would say this is more in line with like a jelly kind of finish, or maybe jelly leaning. As you can see on the first coat, I do have really great coverage so far. Obviously, it's a little bit sheer in some spots, not totally even or full coverage, but still super packed with those shimmers, so I feel like that's very distracting from how uneven the base might look. And because this one was so dark, I actually found that it was pretty much almost opaque on 2 coats alone. I feel like it was only in very extreme lighting that I could make out a little hint of nail line, but because of how dark this is, I just didn't think 3 coats was necessary, at least not for my live swatch. This one also does have a subtle shift to purple in indirect light, but here, back to my full hand swatch, I did end up doing a 3rd coat just to show you how that looks, and I would say that this looks pretty much fully opaque, which isn't a surprise considering how deep the color is. And yeah, this one is super gorgeous and moody. And like the last shade, this one doesn't really shine in indirect light, but it does have a beautiful soft glow. Next up we have Swan Song, and this one is described as a buildable white jelly base with a blue micro shimmer. I know Holo Taco has already given us a number of white specialty finish polishes, but I couldn't help but be more excited about this one. I admittedly wasn't super in love with the previous ones, so I was kind of nervous about how the formula would be on this, and I was really impressed with it. You can see on the first coat, I got really nice coverage that most importantly was even. I feel like this self-levels really nicely, and it has a very smooth and easy to work with formula, just like the other shades. I think this one also does lean more towards that jelly consistency, but it also is very pigmented at the same time. So even though you do see a decent amount of nail line, there still is a lot of coverage as well. But yeah, if you are not a fan of visible nail line, I would highly recommend using a blurring base coat for this one, because because even on my shorter nails here, I did 3 coats and you can still see some nail lines. So I personally don't mind it, but I just know it's not for everybody. This one seemed the most lackluster in lower lighting, where it was really hard to pick up on that blue shimmer, but in any other lighting, it definitely looks like a moonstone. Then we have Vitamin Glow, and this one is described as a light cornflower blue jelly base with a pink micro shimmer and a scattered holographic glitter. So formula-wise, I would say that this one is most similar to Moon Lagoon, where it leans a little bit more crelly-ish in my opinion, but not as pearly. I feel like this one definitely has a little bit more of like a frosted shimmer look. But that being said, it had a flawless formula that was just so smooth, so even coverage. It self-levels really nicely. I was so impressed with how this looked on the first coat alone. Even though it was a touch sheer, it just was really satisfying to paint with. And of course, doing the second coat does provide more coverage, but there is still a hint of nail line. But I definitely think it is pretty passable, especially if you have shorter nails. And I love that this one has a beautiful shift to yellow in extreme lighting. It is just giving me these sunrise vibes. And yeah, here in 3 coats, you can see that this is pretty much fully opaque. So it's not a typical sheer jelly kind of formula. That's why I would call it more of a crelly. And again, this one has a really beautiful soft glow. Up next we have Phantom Call, and this one is described as a purple mauve jelly base with an orange to pink micro shimmer and a scattered hollow. So this is the second darker or moodier shade in the collection, and at first I thought I wasn't going to like this one, but once I tried it on, I was really impressed with it. I think it had another super flawless formula that was very even coverage on the first coat alone, and I don't know if it's just because of the color combination in this one that just makes the shimmer especially glowy, but I feel like it just popped so much more. And no surprise, because this one is in a slightly darker base, I feel like it was pretty much fully opaque on 2 coats alone. Weirdly though, I didn't see any of the pink in the shimmer. I just saw the shift from orange to green. And again, here is the full hand swatch in 3 coats, and I feel like it just looks so cool. I love that really bright shimmer in contrast to the base color, and that dainty hollow sparkle is super beautiful. And I really love how shifty this one looked in more indirect lighting. I feel like it almost wants to be a multi-chrome. The shimmer in this definitely stood out the most compared to the others in the collection, especially in lower lighting. And rounding out the collection, we have Cloud 9, and this one is described as a light baby pink jelly base with a cyan micro shimmer. So again, I personally would call this more of a crelly leaning base, very similar to Vitamin Glow and Moon Lagoon. You can see just how pigmented the base is on the first coat alone. I was genuinely so surprised to see the coverage because I was just expecting it to be a lot more sheer and almost patchy, but I had the opposite experience. It was just so smooth and even, and it built up really beautifully. So like the others in the collection, especially the more lighter colors, this one was a little bit sheer on 2 coats where you can still see a little hint of nail line, but I feel like the shimmer definitely really stands out and kind of obscures it for the most part. And unfortunately, I don't think the shimmer really shifts to another color in extreme lighting. At least I couldn't see it. And lastly, here is the full hand swatch of this one in 3 coats, and like I mentioned, there still is a little tiny hint of nail line, but I feel like it's pretty obscured for the most part. But because this is on the lighter side, kind of closer to Swan Song, I think I would recommend a blurring base coat, especially if you aren't a fan of visible nail line. And like the others in the collection, this one had a really subtle kind of glow in indirect light that kind of gave it that frosty, almost pearlescent look. I did still want to do a collection skittle just because I really enjoy seeing all of the colors worn all at once. I obviously am such a fan of this color palette. No surprise, my favorites are going to be the 4 lighter ones, but I still enjoyed seeing the 2 darker shades to kind of balance out the collection. I just think they look super cohesive, obviously getting all of these winter kind of landscape vibes. Just so magical. And funny enough, while I was wearing the skittle, I was was like, why does this somehow look so familiar? And I realized it's because I basically wore a very, very similar skittle months ago when I did my fairy core video. The only difference was the purple on my thumb was a lot lighter, but yeah, just really funny and no surprise that I am a fan of this collection. And lastly, I did want to compare how these looked in 2 coats versus 3 coats. So here is the collage worn in 2 coats. You can see there is like a hint of nail line in some of the shades where they're kind of obscured, the most obvious being Swan Song though. But once I do a 3rd coat, I feel like not much changes in terms of the coverage, but you do see a noticeable difference in the color where they just get a lot more intense, especially for the 2 darker shades in the middle. So I wouldn't say 3 coats is necessary, especially for coverage when you have shorter nails, but it does help with the color. So finally getting into the comparisons, I want to start with a couple of quick bottle comparisons. For Moon Lagoon, the first one here is Light Link, which you can see is obviously a lot darker in its base color and obviously has a very different shimmer. And here it is next to Too Good to Be Blue, which is a cream. It doesn't have any shimmer or anything like that, but that one's more of a true sky blue. You can see there's more aqua in Moon Lagoon. When it comes to the potential dupes, I of course am showing this next to Mooncat's Earth to Gaia. This one is described as a jade green, and it definitely is a bit more green than Moon Lagoon, but with a more purple shimmer instead of pink. And I also wanted to show this next to Mooncat's Melting Clocks, which isn't around anymore. This one has a more similar shimmer, I think, but the base in this is more of a true sky blue. So here on the nail, I'm wearing 2 coats of each, and these are surprisingly not exact dupes, but they obviously are very similar, well within the same family. Moon Lagoon, I think, is a pretty solid in-between of these 2 shades, especially when it comes to the base color, but I would say that one is a little bit more opaque and also just a bit more vibrant. And lastly, for good measure, I did want to show Moon Lagoon next to Lurid's Nettle and Briar. That one is more of a true jade green, so definitely not dupes. And the shimmer seems to be the same color, but it's a lot stronger in Lurid. Next, for Shadow Lake, I knew I wanted to see this next to Mooncat's Dark Night of the Soul, which came out in the somewhat recent Fallen collection. I thought they had a similar base color, but the shimmer was a little bit brighter almost in Mooncat. But seeing them on the nail, they are actually pretty different, so I wouldn't call these dupes either. Mooncat's is definitely a little bit darker, more of this blurple kind of base color, while Shadow Lake has more of a gray base that looks purple, probably because of the blue shimmer. I also have to show this next to Mooncat's Misery is my favorite color from last year's Inner Apocalypse collection. These 2 I thought were also going to be like dead on dupes if the last 2 weren't, but they're surprisingly more different. I was just so shocked to see how different they looked on the nail because, again, in the bottle side by side, they looked pretty similar. Mooncat's is definitely more buildable and has more full coverage, and the shimmer is a lot more subtle in Mooncat too. It's definitely more glowy and shifty in Shadow Lake. And lastly, I wanted to show this next to Mooncat's Twilight Sonata. I have it swatched on the swatch stick since I was running warm and I wanted to show the cold color. That one is also too dark to be a dupe. Moving on to Swan Song, I was immediately reminded of Cirque's Mystic Moonstone, which is this white pearly base with this really vibrant blue shimmer, but that one you can tell is a lot more aqua. And I also was immediately reminded of Mooncat's Ghost of Hecate, which is this super glowy and intense white jelly with a blue shimmer. The main difference here is that Mooncat and Cirque both have a dainty hollow sparkle, while Holo Taco does not. But there is also a pretty big difference in their coverage, where I'm showing 1 coat each here, and you can see just how sheer both Mooncat and Cirque are. Just from the first swipe alone, the white base really comes through in Swan Song, so it builds up even more once you do that 2nd coat. So if you didn't like how sheer Cirque or Mooncat were, I think Holo Taco would be the better option, but the trade-off is that the shimmer is a little bit more subtle compared to the other 2. Then I remembered Mooncat's Head in the Clouds, which is this white, crully kind of base with this bright blue shimmer, which again is a little bit more on the brighter aqua side. It's not this deeper cobalt kind of color. And these are not exact dupes, but definitely the closest to being dupes. Mooncat's base is a little bit more pigmented and I think a little bit more gray. And lastly, for good measure, I wanted to show Swan Song next to Holo Taco's Milky White Shimmer, which came out in the Cookies and Creams bundle earlier this year. Obviously, I knew these weren't going to be dupes because they have different shimmer colors. And I know Swan Song might look yellowish in the bottle, but that's just because of the blue iridescent shimmer in it that gives it a yellowish glow. On the nail, it definitely does have a pretty pure white base. I'm showing these in 1 and 2 coats here, and I think I would say that Milky White Shimmer is a little bit more opaque. Moving on to Vitamin Glow, I of course had to show this next to Spyglass from the Royalty collection earlier this year, since Vitamin Glow was the prototype called B12 that lost out to Spyglass. So obviously Spyglass is a crushed hollow formula with a blue micro shimmer, so just visually it looks very different. I thought the base colors definitely looked similar in the bottle, but as you can see, Spyglass is a bit darker. I did also want to show Vitamin Glow next to Peri-Social just for a quick color comparison. That one obviously is like a true periwinkle. There's a bit more purple in the base. Vitamin Glow is more of that blue cornflower leaning color, so I thought that I could maybe try to recreate it using one of the lightest cornflower blues that I have, which is Olive's Jeannie, but unfortunately I don't have Polar Princess, which is the pink shimmer topper from Holo Taco, so I had to use Scorched Earth, which is more red and a little too sparse. Maybe I should have done a second coat, but even with all this layering, it just didn't really compare. So I did have a couple of Cirque shades that I wanted to compare this to. The first one is Hygge, which as you can see has a kind of similar finish, but the base color is a bit lighter and more blue. The shimmer obviously is also very orangey, so I thought something closer was Cirque's Spoonful of Sugar, which has more of that same pinky purple kind of shimmer color. And the base color looks pretty similar here in the bottle. There's just a lot more hollow in Cirque, but seeing them side by side on the nail, you can definitely tell them apart. Mainly because both of the Cirque polishes are just a lot more sheer. Vitamin Glow is the most buildable. And lastly, I have a couple of Mooncat comparisons. The first one here is After the Rain from the Fallen collection. I was convinced that these were going to be dupes, but as you can see, Mooncat is a little bit more of a true periwinkle kind of color, so it's a little bit more purple leaning, and the shimmer is a little bit more of that orangey red sort of color. So on the nail, I'm wearing 2 coats of each, and Mooncat is a little bit more sheer too. So similar vibes, but not dupes. And then I remembered Mooncat's Mercury in Retrograde, which launched during their last lunar sale. Seeing these in the bottle, I was convinced that these were going to be dupes since the last one was like a little too far off. Mooncat's is a magnetic, but I am showing it unmagnetized here. This is 2 coats of each, and I feel like you can kind of see that pink shimmer, but it honestly doesn't stand out as much in Mooncat as it does in Holo Taco. I do think the base in Mooncat is a little bit darker or dustier as well. So again, definitely similar vibes here, but not exact dupes. Then for Phantom Call, I knew I didn't have exact dupes for this shade, but I did have some shades that were similar. The first one here is Cirque's Velvetine, which is that classic shimmer formula with a dainty hollow sparkle, but as you can see, that one's a bit lighter. And I also have Starly's The Cat's Meow, which is a little bit deeper than Cirque's Velvetine, but I don't think it's as deep as Phantom Call, or maybe it is, but it's a little bit more on the blue toned side, whereas Phantom Call is a little bit more of that true purple kind of base color. These all have a dainty hollow sparkle, and I think they have the same coppery shimmer too. It's just the base colors that are different. And lastly, for Cloud 9, I actually wanted to quickly show this next to Holo Taco's Pink Smoothing Base, just for a color reference. That one is a little bit more of a milky whitened pink. But for actual comparisons, I of course am showing this next to Mooncat's A Midsummer's Dream from the Once Upon a Fairy Tale collection. It has a pretty similar pink base color, at least at first glance, but the shimmer is a little bit different, where it's this brighter, almost electric blue in Mooncat, and it's a little bit more minty looking in Holo Taco. And I would say that Mooncat is more of a pearly kind of shimmer too, so I wouldn't call these dupes. I do have a few more bottle comparisons because I thought I had a closer shimmery pink. The first one that I have here is Swatches Cancer, which was from HHC a couple of months ago. That one has a little bit more of a lilac-y pink base though, and it's a lot more sheer. This next one is Great Lakes Lacquer, the Village Chief, which is a little bit more on the corally pink side, and the shimmer is actually kind of green head on, but it does shift to this cyan shade. And lastly, here it is next to Crack's Feed Me Treats, which is a pink base with a blue shimmer, but the pink is a little bit more saturated and the blue is a little bit more of that electric blue. So finally, I think the closest pink that I had to Cloud 9 was Rogue's Pride and Prejudice, which if I remember correctly was kind of described as a chrome shimmer. So the shimmer is very intense and packed in that one. It definitely stands out a lot more than Holo Taco, but the base in Rogue is a little bit more sheer too, so these are not dupes. So that wraps up my swatches and comparisons for Holo Taco's new Underglow collection. As a reminder, the collection box itself is limited edition, but the polishes are going to be here to stay. So as always, I will have Holo Taco's website linked down below if you do want to pick any of these up. And speaking of, I don't think I mentioned this in the intro, but alongside this collection launch, their Black Friday sale is going to be live. Unfortunately, these are going to be excluded from the sale, which is typical to Holo Taco. It's usually their most recent collection that is excluded from the sale, but everything else is pretty much available. If you haven't already, go check out my best of Holo Taco video, which will be linked in the cards. But yeah, back to this collection. I cannot wait to hear your thoughts on these. Obviously, if you are familiar with me and my taste, you know that I love this collection. I would say it is one of my favorite Holo Taco collections, definitely of the year. I am just such a sucker of these super soft shades with these really beautiful shimmers and the dainty holo sparkle. These are just so up my alley, and I'm so honored that so many of you guys know that about me and just will like tag me or respond to my stories talking about the collection and say, oh my god, this was made for you, because I am just so obsessed with it. And I think the box is beautiful. This is hands down a collection box that I would be grabbing at launch if I didn't get this in PR. Now, all of that being said, I do also completely recognize that these are not unique colors, especially if you are not a Holo Taco exclusive kind of shopper. If you are familiar with other indies, especially Mooncat, you saw from my comparison portions, there are definitely a lot of very similar shades. Just because I am very annoying when it comes to, you know, calling things dupes, I wouldn't call any of them like dupes per se, but I do know that they are super similar to the point that if you already have some of the Mooncat shades, you don't need to pick these up. And I know that can be frustrating to some people as well, like seeing some of the early reactions on Reddit. A lot of people seemed kind of upset that these were almost like a copy of Mooncat shades, but on one hand, I obviously recognize that these are new and unique to Holo Taco's catalog, so I appreciate that. And I just kind of consider it like a win-win, because if you do already have the Mooncat shades, you're saving a ton of money by skipping these. But if you don't have the Mooncat shades for whatever reason and you weren't interested in picking those up, you can grab these. So I see it as a win-win. I know a lot of people might not see it that way though, but I feel like in this day and age with just how saturated the nail polish world is, we are just gonna see a lot of repeat kind of shades. And unfortunately, this was a winner for me just because I am a sucker for these kinds of colors. So again, I would love to know your thoughts if you're gonna be grabbing these or skipping them entirely, especially in favor of just shopping their Black Friday sale, because again, these are not gonna be included in that. Make sure you let me know any and all thoughts that you have down below so we can chat about it. But thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.